Board meeting. Next will be our work session of Las Cruces City Council. But before we begin, if you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so today is Monday, April 25th, 2022. It's approximately 1:03 p.m. Also, a quick happy birthday to my middle son, Frank. He turned 24. And yeah. And with that, we're going to start with our call to order. So we've got the action items, the approval of the minutes from our January 24th, 2022 TID board meeting. Motion and a second.
So moved. Gandara.
Second, Abeda.
Okay, motion made by Vice Chair Gandara, second by Board Member Abeta. Christine?
This is on the motion to approve the TID board meeting minutes from January 24th, 2022. Board Member Abeta.
Yes.
Board Member Graham.
Yes.
Board Member Bencomo.
Yes.
Board Member Curran.
Yes.
Board Member Flores.
Yes.
Board Member Gandara.
Yes.
And Chair.
Yes. Okay, so we have three discussion items. First one is going to be the financial update. Chris Favor will be presenting.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair,
And
members.
I also want to introduce our ex officio members. I'm sorry, Chris, is Commissioner Shannon Reynolds from the county, Doña County Commissioner. Welcome, Commissioner. It's a little bit, we got to get back used to it again, so we're back to regular distance, and it's hard to believe that we were this close, which is fine. Yeah. So now I should not have any problems wondering who said the motion in second. All right, there you go, Chris.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the TID Board. Chris Favor, Economic Development. I have a few slides. Real quick, a financial update, move into, and we can pause for questions after that if you want. An update on the current TID projects, an update on the Plaza Shade structure process, and then Public Works is going to do an update on the Campo Street redesign study. So here are the monthly revenues above baseline for the TID, starting with the beginning of the fiscal year in July. You can see that, beginning in August, they've been right around $300,000 to $400,000 a month in collections and holding pretty steady. Revenue above baseline for the fiscal year, we're at about $2.9 million, almost $3 million for this year, which is up from the previous years. The three funds, 2815, which is revenues and operations, $5.9 million. Fund 4270, capital projects unrestricted, is $1.4 million. And then funds 4271, which is bond projects restricted, specifically for street projects within the TID. That sits at a little over $600,000, bringing the total for the three funds in the TID to just a little over $8 million. Current projects, so I'm back here again talking about parking lot 7. We've had some delays with the structure coming in from the manufacturer. COVID, supply chain, those types of things have really slowed down this process, but we spoke with the contractor this morning and they're giving us a date of approximately mid-May for the restroom facility to arrive. Once that's in place, they'll begin the demo of the current restroom facility and then finish the repaving of the rest of that parking lot. The first half was done last summer, and so they'll finish up the second half this summer, an estimated completion of about mid-August on that project. So, Campo Street redesign, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail here because I'm going to turn it over to Public Works to give you a little more, but just some background on the project. About a $400,000 project, budgeted from the TID. About a little over $200,000 was set up for this study. And the purpose of the study was to make Campo Street feel more pedestrian friendly and visually look more like the rest of downtown. So they were working on a few different things related to architecture, landscaping, lighting, traffic control, ADA compliance. We did hold several stakeholder meetings in January, April, and August. Following the recommendation regarding the redesign, we're looking at about 6 to 8 months for the actual design to be completed. There is money in the TID for that, specifically for the street projects. Estimated construction is probably somewhere around $3 million. Any questions on any of those projects?
Board Member Flores?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Favor. Can you go back to slide, that one? So in FY14, why does it go up and down so much? I mean, FY14 was 2 million plus, a little over 2 million. But then it really goes up a whole lot. And then it really goes down like in FY19. That was pre-COVID. So why was that so low?
So the TID, part of the TID, there was a match from the state up until a certain point, and that was around fiscal year 2018. So you'll notice the decrease there had a lot to do with the match ending from the state. So the rest of the money from there on out was just revenues above baseline collected by this, by the city.
So then you have that big jump in FY22 to almost 3 million, and to what? And that is in spite of COVID. Everything we blame on COVID. So can we blame that on COVID too?
Councilor Flores or Board Member Flores, Dr. Payadas and I have spoken at length about the TID. There's some of it that is still kind of a mystery, so to speak, in terms of how it comes in. But we've sort of narrowed it down to probably 3 things. One, inflation prices and have sort of caused a bit of an uptick. And so in price, inflation, and then also just in price increases. But additionally, we think that there's been a delay in just the state reporting back monies to the city. So I think that if you see the large numbers for this fiscal year probably accounts for some delays during COVID with reporting back to the city. Because you can even see in this slide here, a substantial jump from July to August, and then it maintains a pretty high level. So that's kind of what we've sort of figured out, was that the money gets collected by the state, then it funnels down to the city. And that's kind of where we're thinking there's a bit of a delay in the money actually getting, sent down to the city.
Do you have any idea why it takes so long, or what the process is that takes such? Because 2019 was pretty low too, and that was before COVID.
Yeah,
so.
it was right around $1 million. We don't really know. We've looked into it, and there's, I've reached out to other communities to talk with some of their TID boards to find out, and there's some similarities in some places and not in others. So we're, it's something that we're always kind of trying to figure out. There isn't a real concrete answer right now. The best we can do is just kind of narrow it down to those 3. But it feels like, especially if you look at, FY20, FY21, that's when, we did some of our budgeting for this year, and we were thinking we were going to be about $500,000 is actually what we budgeted for the TID this past fiscal year. So
then it's quite unpredictable, and so it would necessarily make it difficult to plan anything, or
to
right?
to some extent. I mean, large scale projects, would be a little bit more difficult, But there's a healthy balance in the TID right now to give us, funds to work with some of the projects we're dealing with now. So.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Faber, so there's no way of there are questions, perhaps, that have presumably been made to the distribution of TID monies? Questions of the state by our municipality, other municipalities? I'm just wondering.
From our, possibly, yeah. I mean, the revenues come in through Treasury. I don't know if there's been conversations between Treasury and the state. I've reached out to other communities to see if they're seeing similar trends. Some of them have, some of them haven't. This is kind of the 3 things that we've sort of been able to narrow it down to, so.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Faber.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Vice Chair Gandara?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chris. This question has been posed before, and I know that when you see, if you go back to the slide, Chris, we have to remember that we had big construction occurring, which is the two-way conversion, the plaza. So you're going to see, and I'm looking at Elizabeth and probably others that have taken on this, Mandy. I think you can very clearly denote sort of the when you have larger construction, that's when you're going to see some of these higher amounts because there's money coming in. And then you see the correlation between the state's distribution is different. And I don't know that it goes away completely, but if we want to have more of a robust conversation, I would bet that Leanne and others, I see her over here smiling at us, and she could probably explain some of that. And I think it's important for folks that are new on this TID board to understand that.
Mayor Pro Tem, you're absolutely correct. The state did end in 2019. And you are absolutely correct about the 17 and 18. That was when we were finishing up the roundabout and all the construction that we had going on. So of course, all that construction was hit with GRT as well. The TID did not have too much of a slow start, but 14, as you can see, we had a lot of construction in our TID plan. We have multiple projects that we worked on. Remember, we got a couple of sponge bonds, and we used those bonds to pay for a lot of that construction. So a lot of that construction did have GRT. I will tell you, I will gander to tell you that on our GRT, there is only a 2-month delay. Okay, as they collect all the GRT, the next month it's analyzed by Taxation and Rev. They get all the documents in from each of the businesses, and then they document all that, and then the next month we receive a distribution check. I do not know. I will probably ask either economic development, but I would maybe gander that the reason FY22 is so high, just like our own GRT is so high, is because of the internet sales tax. There could be some businesses down in this area that do sales online, and they're now being charged and sending to other states and throughout, and they are being charged gross receipts, or they're coming in, they could be charged gross receipts tax. So it could be that there's a gross receipts tax for internet sales that it's coming in. One of the things I will tell you about our state on the reports that we get from them, it is only divided out by industry. We could give you that information by industry. Our largest industry is retail, which is probably most of what downtown, give or take, is. It's hard for me to know without actually looking at and maybe doing some kind of survey down in that area to see what all, it's going on in the businesses. And I apologize, but right now, our own general fund GRT is growing, and it's mostly due because of we went from destination-based to location-based, and it's the GRT, the increase in internet sales tax.
Thank you, Leanne. I know that staff work diligently to ensure that many of the addresses are specific to the TID district. I know that was something that happened under Andy Hume's time. I also know that during COVID, Jennifer, through the Downtown Partnership, worked very diligently with many of the specific retail to move and to pivot and move. And I know people don't like that word, but I'm going to use it because it happened. They moved into internet sales very quickly. And I know there were a few Meow and Company, Beck's, COAS, and so those, I think, all contribute to what we see here currently, and I think we can't forget that total, if you move into that slide, It's like $8 million. There's a lot of money in there if people want more specific. And there was a time that tax and rev wasn't 2 months. It was longer, and there was a lot of dialogue that was happening from staffs to tax and rev to try to figure those things out. So thank you, Leanne. Thank you, Chris. I think that's important to know. Some of my questions regarding slide 6 in terms of where the allocation is, was that from the beginning of when we first determined the TID that this is where the funding was going to go to revenue, so much to revenue and operations, capital projects, bond projects, or how did that get factored in, Chris? I know you weren't here from the onset, but I'm sure there's others that can help answer that question.
Mr. Chair, Board Member Gondeta, I can tell you that all the revenues come into 2815, and then they're dispersed in the other two funds as needed. The money that's in 4271 is money that's left over from other projects that were specific bond projects for streets. And then the money that's in the capital projects, 4270, would have been moved out of 2815 for projects in the past. And so some of it is like the parking, the parking lot 7 and things like that. So, but all the revenues come into the first one, and then they're moved as needed.
And the board is responsible in determining what projects that funding goes to. And remember, there's a big project with the Amador happening currently that I think contributes to the revenue or the total, if you will. So thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. I don't have specific questions about the parking lot or the Amador. But I'm waiting to hear a little more about the shade structure. I think that's really very, well, since you passed very quickly on Campo,
Well, I'm going to let.
when do you estimate the project beginning and completion?
Mr. Chair, Board Member Gondeta, I'm going to let Public Works, when they give their full presentation next, they'll get into all those details. This was just a kind of reminder how we got to where we are.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Chris.
We have Board Member Reynolds and then Board Member Flores.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My comment was going to be first, what Councilor Flores, asked the questions about where the money comes from and all that is actually, and how we can plan it. I think that was a great question. Pro Temp Gondura did a great job of answering that and addressing that, as well as the other lady. However, I would like to point out just finally that being able to identify and understand where those revenues come from is something that is important, I think, for this board and other board and the council board later, so that we can predict and anticipate what revenue we're going to have and be able to plan better to use the money appropriately. And so understanding that and doing finding more detail about exactly where this money is coming from, I think is valuable to both this board and the other board as well. And so thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Reynolds, Board Member Flores.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you again, Mr. Favor, and thank you also, where are you, Amy? Thank you, Amy. Oh, there you are. Leanne, I'm sorry. So my question wasn't so much to question what you're doing, Mr. Favor, so please understand that. My question is directed to what the state is doing. And that was my question. That's my concern, remains my concern. And you have no control over that. But I think that Dr. Payares started to get up to answer a question or address a concern, perhaps one of mine, perhaps a comment that Mayor Pro Tem Gondeta made. But your input is always invaluable, Dr. Payares, so.
Mr. Chair, Board Member Flores, let me bring this is the slide, right? Okay. Yes, Board Member Flores, just to address your question regarding some of the frequency in which it was reported, I just wanted to remind the board that during COVID, there was a suspension of reporting on some of the taxes from both the federal and the state level. Well, not suspension, but they were allowed to file later on for some of the taxes. So that may have delayed some of the reporting. And since it is done in a case-by-case basis by all the businesses, they could have very well hold back into paying some of their GRT and later on reported it, which is exactly what Chris was referring to, combined with some of the additional things on the retail that was mentioned by Leanne, as well as the inflation rate, which could have helped in jumping that specific year, which is 2022, into that high level. So it could be a combination of all of those factors.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Payares, and again, thank you, Mr. Favor. But my concern is this, the accounting practices by the state, for them to be distributing that money and not delineating exactly how it came in, when it came in, and for us to have that. And again, for purposes of anticipating what kind of revenue we can depend on, and to see whether the TID is really working. Just in terms of, and I think that we can see that it's working, but I wonder if we can maximize that or somehow. I don't think I'm out of bounds by saying that the state has an obligation, in my opinion, to give us that sort of an accounting. And that's, so when you have dinner with the governor next week, be sure to tell them. No, I'm just kidding. You're not having dinner with her, but I do want you to know that was the intent of the purpose of my questions. And again, thank you very much, Dr. Payares and Mr. Favor.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, seeing none, I guess we'll move over to the current projects update. Or
Yeah, I kind of,
touched a
Chairman,
little bit
yeah, so what I was going to do here is just kind of jump into a little update on where we are with Plaza Shade. And it's been a hot topic for several months. I put together a group of downtown stakeholders made up of DLCP, Arts and Cultural District Board members, the Doñana Arts Council, downtown businesses, the farmers market, and a few event planners that do bigger events on the plaza. And what we did was we went back and reviewed all the options that were presented to council. I believe it was like August or September of 2021, somewhere around there. As we recall, no one was really too excited about any of those options, so we started to look at what we liked, what we didn't like, and what some different directions we could go. I'll be making a more formal recommendation to the city manager's office once we pull everything together, but what we basically narrowed it down to was two different ways that we're looking at, and there's one here that we're obviously a little bit more excited about. But we met with the consultants who helped us the first time around and presented one other particular option for shade, specifically on the west side of the plaza, that would deal more with the afternoon sun when it's the hottest on the plaza. So we talked to them about some of the options there. They're actually looking at it, and they'll be getting us an evaluation in here pretty soon. The other project that we really kind of liked was going back to what was sort of originally intended with the trees on the plaza from the beginning. So we met with the city forester through Parks and Rec and talked about going in and replacing the current trees there with mature trees that would provide, lots of shade in the summer on both sides of the plaza. Also would make it not a cold place to be in the wintertime because you wouldn't have a permanent structure providing shade year round. It would just be when it was most needed. So that's kind of the direction I think the committee was really looking at going, was more mature trees on both the east and west side of the plaza, which would provide shade in the afternoon when it's the most intense, and obviously add to the shade count downtown, the tree count, which is, I think everybody can agree would probably be a good thing. So well, as things develop and I put together my final report, I will certainly report back, but that's kind of where things stand right now. So the committee's kind of leaning towards more of the green option versus a more permanent shade structure.
So Chris, when you said the first time around, are you talking about 6, 7 years ago, first time around?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, more in line with what I think the original vision was, is to have different larger trees there than what we ended up with now. So kind of going back to that, using the budget, money from the TID fund to sort of fund this and do it the way that would provide, aesthetically more pleasing to the plaza area, but also the shade that we would like to see down there.
But I think the original one also had some longer shade on there. I mean, it was one where I think if the city had purchased all 3 parts, they could have it completely shaded, half shaded, or just a fourth. Is that the one you were?
No, Mr. Chair, I'm thinking specifically back to just the portion about the trees from the original idea of the plaza. Yeah, not the designs that were presented last year, but like the
No, not
idea
last year.
that,
When
the
you
idea
said-
that there'd be larger trees on the plaza, sort of going back to that concept,
Okay.
yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Yes?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you again, Mr. Favor. The trees that we have there now, I've said this before, are really the wrong kind of trees anyway, so I hope that's an impetus, because those sycamores are going to grow bigger than, just bigger than big. I mean, if we really expect that plaza to be here 100 years from now or 50 years from now, the sycamores grow, and they're just huge trees, and I don't know why that decision was made back when, but maybe that'd be an impetus to get them out now while they're still on the small side, but they're getting big already, they've grown. So what kind of trees do you think will replace those? You just said shadier, but you really don't have any detail.
Mr. Chair, Board Member Flores, specifically, I don't know that we've identified a particular type of tree. Part of it also is going to factor into this is availability. When that freeze happened in Texas a few years ago, it really wiped out a lot of available stock. So finding mature trees is going to be more of a challenge. But the specific type of tree, I'm not exactly sure, but I do know that there's some issues with the way that the soil was done and a lot of things there that are actually prohibiting growth of the current trees, and their life expectancy isn't very long under those circumstances. So going in, doing it the correct way to allow those trees to grow under optimum, conditions would be ideal to sort of provide a nice shade canopy down there.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm glad it's being looked into. Thank you again. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Absolutely. Board Member Abeta?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Favor. If those trees had to be taken out, is there going to be work that needs to be done on the patio portion of it? And then is that being factored into the cost?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Board Member Abeta. So part of the proposal we're putting together would factor in everything from removing the current trees. There would have to be utility work there to relocate power, irrigation work, work for, on the soil. So all those things are being factored into the project. I still think all that considered, it's going to be a more affordable option than going with some of the shade structures, which it will be a nice benefit as well. But yeah, we're looking at all those factors and probably looking at an ideal start time would be in January of next year. You get through the holiday season, get through the main event season, and ideally do it when things are still dormant so it's ready to go for the spring and fall season.
Okay, thank you. And then how long do you think that it might take as an estimate with that if you started in January?
Mr. Chair, Board Member Abeta, we would shoot for some time, and I don't know specifics because I don't know how long it's going to take to do a lot of that work, but be ready to go for sort of the late spring, summer event season. So I don't think we're talking about a huge amount of work there to remove the trees and redo some of the work there. I think a few months could probably be a good timeline, but I don't know until we get into the landscape architects and they really give us details about how something like that would work.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Mayor.
Okay, anyone else? Is that it, or are you going to do the Campo redesign?
Mr. Chair, so at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Public Works for them to give you an update on the Campo Street redesign study. Yeah, just enter, and then you can use the up and down arrows.
Oh, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Steve Pacheco with Public Works, and we brought the Campo Street study. Basically, this is the public meeting show that we had, and I know it's a lot of information, a lot of slides, but we wanted to show the board what was discussed. So I'll rapidly go through the entire, or all these slides. This is just the project limits, Picacho to Amador. We discussed conditions, analyzed all the different options that we had. We, of course, have a great need for improvements along Campo. And we discussed project goals. We talked about trying to tie the districts together. We talked a lot about landscaping for the project and how it's going to tie into the downtown with the downtown street improvements. We talked a lot about the alternative goals, traffic calming being one of them, pedestrian mobility, and parking, and of course, safety. We had a stakeholder meeting and 2 public meetings that we discussed this at. We had our alternatives that we sifted through and came up with a final one. This is our alternative here that we came up with that has 11-foot driving lanes, 5 to 10-foot sidewalk, of course, depending on right-of-way. There's a lot of variance along the Campo. And with landscaping, we have a bicycle path, and the final one, we're still finalizing the study, but it won't be elevated, it'll be street level. And again, this is just the concept from the study, and next we'll be starting with the design. And we're thinking we should be finishing this up in the next couple weeks, study portion, and then we'll be able to go to the design, and that should take 6 to 8 months. So end of the year, beginning of the next year. And that was, sorry there's so many slides, but I just wanted to show you what we discussed with the public at the public meetings. Any questions for me?
Thanks, Steve. Without looking, I'm sure there's a question from Board Member Flores. Oh, yeah, there it is. There you
Boy,
go.
you must be a magician or something. Brilliant, brilliant, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Pacheco. So where does this begin? Where does Campo, what you're presented, what are the streets that?
It goes from, I have a slide
I think
here.
they're called perpendicular streets. They begin where and they end where?
Picacho to Amador.
I'm sorry.
Picacho to Amador.
Oh, so it's that big, the whole stretch there?
Yes.
Okay, so then how does that, there's that federal building there.
Yes.
And does that in any way impede or affect or whatever, anything that we want to do there, that the city wants to do there? Do you know?
That's one of the pinch points where we're going to have a narrowing of the right-of-way.
Yeah, and I could see in one of the drawings that it was skewed there.
Exactly.
And so they're not going to budge, they're just going to keep their little federal land there or whatever.
Yes, unfortunately, there's not very much we can do with the federal building there, so we'll have to work around it.
But it'll remain a two-way?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Pacheco, and thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Board Member Bencomo.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for the presentation. You flew by it, but I got it all. In terms of the Complete Streets ordinance that's currently being worked and reworked some more, do you feel like this design is in line with those principles?
Yes, we looked at a lot of the policies of the cities, and they are, the study took into account those policies, the Complete Streets included.
Okay, great. And then can you go to the design one where we can sort of see? You said the bike lane will be on street level, right?
Correct.
It wasn't in the design, but you said it would be. Okay. And then in terms of, so it'll just the bike lane and then it'll be raised for the sidewalk?
Yes, correct.
In terms of, just because we had this discussion at one of our PRCs earlier about shade structures for public transit stops, is that being taken into account? Will those be put in place? I'm assuming, how will public transit stops be affected during this time? And then will you be sure to have shelters?
It is a bus route, however, there are no stops along Campo.
In this portion?
Right,
Okay.
correct.
Okay.
So they won't be affected.
Okay, thank you so much, appreciate it.
That-
Okay, anyone else? Okay, well, thanks, Steve. Appreciate the update.
Thank you very much.
So Chris, does that pretty much conclude your discussion items?
Mr. Chair, yes, that wraps up our presentation for the TID, unless there's any final questions.
Board Member Flores, no, nothing? Okay. All right, I think
Yes,
we're good.
I can ask maybe 10 more questions, but because I feel sorry for the rest of you, or have pity or compassion, I will not ask. Thank you.
All right, well, then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved by Flores.
Second, Abeta.
Okay, motion made by Board Member Flores, second by Board Member Abeta. Christine?
This is on the motion to adjourn the TID board meeting. Board Member Abeta?
Yes.
Board Member Graham?
Yes.
Board Member Bencomo?
Yes.
Board Member Coran?
Yes.
Board Member Flores?
Yes.
Board Member Gandara?
Yes.
And Chair.
Yes. Okay, he doesn't, unfortunately, he doesn't vote. We just take his money, but no vote. Yeah. So we're adjourned. It's
I'm just a figurehead here, that's all.
1:37 PM. Give us a couple minutes, and then we'll start with our work session.